Hello, everyone. Welcome to our circle and Salve Women. For today, we're going to talk about my latest reflection on forgiveness and judgment. Are we clear? And I wanted to first point out that there has to be something to exist for us to forgive. We forgive when there are those who have wronged us. We forgive, like when I was in my younger days at a dance club and someone stepped on me with their stilettos. They were clearly tipsy and they apologized. And you know what? All I could do was say, no worries, it happens. I mean, what are you going to do? Get angry? Then just work through the pain, right? So when I think about forgiveness, there's always something that makes you go, what am I forgiving? But when it comes to judgment, I really feel that we cast the judgment because of shortcuts. And there doesn't have to be any underlying factor behind it other than what we perhaps have figured out about the world. And, I guess you could say sometimes we're quite stereotypical, or that so some people, we have our certain bias, our certain prejudice. And so when we look at things and we cast judgment, it's to say that there was some merit there of some experience that we've personally journeyed. And so it doesn't necessarily have to have any reason within that moment. I could speak as a teacher, as a parent, as a mother, and anything beyond the roles that I have picked up in life. There are just times where you're casting judgment quickly, and it's really more of what it was in the background that just made you jump to it. I know I've caught myself sometimes where I'm quick to go, oh, so-and-so, you need to pay attention. And they're quick to say, it wasn't me, and then of course I say, okay, my bad, I'm sorry, and if I am corrected and I stand corrected, it's helpful to grow at that moment because it reminds you again and again that essentially you're not always right in casting judgment. Even as a parent, I know that there are times we would laugh and think that it was one child only to come to discover that it was the other child. I mean, there are things in life where you just say to yourself, I'm casting judgment because 9 times out of 10 this person's done it, right? But that one time could have been that innocence that we forget. And so I mention in this reflection that when we think about the fruit from a tree, we're quick to go, oh, that's coming from a bad seed. And yet I think I have read several things in life and also have come across several journeys in life, and just, out of just complete communication with others in their lives and things that have happened, you look at people and go, how could this person be going through something like this when clearly they seem to really have it together and that they have had plans to make everything pure and complete and in the right path, and yet they're going through these struggles with the choices that their children, their offspring have decided. And it's really interesting because when I mentioned this in my reflection, I remember Papa, having to let go. Sadly, I could see it in his face, and he was whispering to this chicken, having to really get rid of this chicken who was just quickly turning around. Every time she would lay an egg, she would turn around and break it. Lay an egg, turn around and break it. And I remember witnessing this, and it's just such an inexplicable behavior that all you can do is think, why? And as I mentioned, I don't speak chicken, but clearly we had to save the rest of the eggs that were about to be. And so I remember my Papa, as soon as she laid an egg, and I think it was like 1 or 2 that he was able to save, he, without even telling me, had gotten rid of the chicken. And I don't even recall Papa serving the chicken for dinner or so. I know that sounds quite direct, but I recall him saying that this one should not be something that we should consume, because obviously there was something about that chicken that was questionable, and Papa didn't feel right about it. But when it came to the eggs, he gave those eggs that was left a chance to then be hatched under someone else's warmth. and incubated, perhaps is the word. And so, you know, I think about the cat that he had, a stray cat that he had brought in, and eventually it had a litter of kittens. And there's this one beautiful pink pawed, purely white one that had not made it. And so, you know, Papa tried to breathe life into it. I still remember that. And it didn't quite make it, you know, didn't make it at all. And so we went and buried it outside, and then coming back, thinking nothing of it, the next day, the lifeless kitten was there with the rest, you know. And I remember the mother cat never looking at me, just continue to clean, lick all of her new litter of kittens, and not look up, as if she knew. It was like, I know you're judging me, but this is my choice. And so we knew that we had to take that one white kitten away again and rebury it, because, you know, it wouldn't be healthy. Just eventually knowing that that kitten would need to, you know, be away as it was decaying with its lost life. And then again, it's like I guessed it, that she's just gonna, you know, pull the kitten out again and bring it back. And sure enough, she did. And I think Papa already knew, you know, that this would happen as well. And so he took the lifeless kitten away and took a long drive and then came back. And I knew that he had perhaps buried it somewhere else where the kitten couldn't, the mother cat could no longer find her lost kitten. And I think about the horse, you know, Prince, the very first one that I rode back in 6th grade at camp. And I was forewarned, okay, this one is going to give you trouble. You sure you want this one? You know, this is the one that's very stubborn and so forth. And I was like, even more. When someone tells you that, I'm like, yeah, no, that's the one. It's the one that I want to ride. And so surely, you know, I mean, the Prince showed his stubbornness toward me and everyone else, because when he wanted to take a drink of water, he just stopped and decided to take a drink of water in the creek. And I remember the instructor saying, or, you know, give him a good kick in the back of your heel, just kick him really hard in the stomach with the back of your heels. And I tried to do the little gentle. And they said, no, you got to do it really hard. And I said, I can't, I'm not going to. Just going to wait for Prince to drink his water. And it made everybody else wait, because we were going along this, you know, what is that, trail. And so then Prince, you know, when he was finished drinking, got back up and then decided to continue to walk me peacefully back to the stables. So for me, I think of those experiences even so young, and then in connection with what I also mentioned in reading about the travesty of genocide. I remember reading about Johannesburg, or just watching the son go there, kneel on the ground and start sobbing, having learned what his father had done, you know, and recalling some events. And then I remember being in a library, and it was like a much awaited book of Jeffrey Dahmer to finally explain why he did what he did. And I remember being able to be, you know, thinking, okay, I'm going to be one of the first to be able to read this. And I'm in the aisle reading, and the only thing I wanted to know was why, you know. And when I got to the point where he started to explain, you know, he lived in this peaceful farm. Mom and Dad had nothing to do with his behavior. It was just that he started off harming the animals in the farm. And then it was like the boredom of just needing more. And that was it for me, is because I think to myself, we always want to do a why. We always want to cast judgment quickly and say, hey, you know, this is why this child is the way they are, and therefore they're going to become this way when they become adults. But what about the good parents who raised a good child? And to not to their knowledge, all of a sudden the child becomes, you know, choices of not so good and away from the light, and just going into pure darkness and even greater darkness beyond that, where they can no longer really find their way out, and all they're doing is hoping for some sense of, you know, relief from it all by replaying it. And then when they get caught, they don't even act surprised. It's as if they just wait. And I remember some forensic psychologists stating that, you know, those who commit the serial murders and so, they are 5 times as witty and perhaps more their intellect as those trying to search for them. And so therefore it's like a cat and mouse game. So I think to myself, but when I read all of these stories, and there was a time where I was quite fascinated with him. And in fact, I pushed through one that was highly disturbing just recently, not because I really like the darkness. It's always like, but why? And then you just read, and then you realize that there's something perhaps that happened in their childhood. And then there are times where it's just like, just this was just something I wanted to fulfill, and it was just a fascination, and I felt like I just had to continue, and it just continued to get worse until eventually they got caught, right? So I've talked about my reflection about the child when I worked at a child trauma center, seeing all these different lovely children, and then I remember one spitting at our supervisor, and the supervisor hugging this child. And, beyond her fury and beyond her pride, of course, later on, she explains to me, that, what that child had gone through, and seeing the gang marks that his parents had burned on his arms, then it like hit me. It's like, okay, we can forgive this one. But then you think to yourself, as I mentioned, is after a while, how far then do we go? How do we mix the good with the potential evil? And do we really know? Do we really know if that child will grow up to be casting any danger in this world? Do we really know, like the chickens the eggs from the chicken that my father was able to save? Do we know if those eggs will then turn up to be somewhat the same as their mother, right? I mean, I think to myself, it's like we are all the most magnificent species to know. And then all of a sudden we cast so much judgment on each other because of our own journeys, of our own pains, of our own trauma. And then somehow we lose trust amongst one another. And we're so quick because we have shortcuts in our minds. And so we're quickly locking our doors when we see those that we don't trust. And we're quickly walking faster, in areas, or not even putting ourselves in those areas. And that's, to say the least, understandable. But what about those ones that was one good? And I think to myself, do we then cast judgment on that one and say, but you know what? That's the one that's just going to go in there with the rest. And unfortunately, we can't save that one, because how do we know he or she's not going to turn up just the same? And, it's tough, because just when I mentioned in the grocery store, when I had spoken to our security guard saying, release this once, this is just a teenager, a child, young child, and begging on his knees, on the security guard's feet, begging to not be taken away, because he would be very much in trouble with his parents if they ever found out that he was stealing candy. And I said, just let this one go. And I remember the security guy didn't mention that in reflection. He's like, he's just going to come back and do the same thing. And I said, well, just this time, let's forgive. Let's just let it go. And we did, thankfully, that I was respected in the manner of my own plea, just calmly asking. And I couldn't do anything the next time. That my security guard proved to be right when we saw this child do the same thing. And that child looked at me, didn't say anything, didn't cry this time as he was being taken away by the police officer, So forgiveness and judgment. I mean, are we really, really clear? And yet do we have to be, I guess, is what I should have stated, because it's tough, when you have been hurt, when you have been pained, when you have been scarred, we don't want to feel that way again. And we don't want to say to ourselves, this is something that won't ever happen again, because how do we really know? And so we start to build walls. And, remembering my student saying that no one will ever spit on me again, that's understandable. But then I also said, let it go, because you have to, and we both acknowledge that was a person who meant to do ill will and not a good person, completely, besides good. And this is not you. This is not who you are. And you know, you have to have the power to just let go and move from it. And it was so nice to have that moment of just having that heart-to-heart talk. No counseling, really, but when a student shares with you those moments, you know that they're just trying to be vulnerable, and that they trust you with their emotions, and perhaps you're the only person that they really even decided to let that go and share with. And it's nice because you say to yourself, okay, obviously, you tell them this is something that you've shared with mom. That's good. But then when they vow that it'll never happen again, you could see why they have this wall. You could see why they act with so much of a edgy rigidity. Is that even a word? And I would like to think, just really hard in their own stance, and making sure that no, they will be a little bit more alert with the world so that they won't be hurt like that again. And so as we get older, I realize that some of us, whatever trauma we have gone through in life, we can decide to fight, to flight or freeze. But still, although we forgive, we then follow along and carry this repertoire of experiences in our lives that then allows us to cast judgment, because better to be safe than sorry. And so we do what we do. So with this, even though we aren't clear of the father, the good father, who will then bear a son who then becomes not so good, and then we have the not so good father who bears a son who becomes exceptionally good, we have to ask ourselves, is it truly the tree, or is it truly the environment of the tree that can also mold a child to then become a grown-up that is making not the greatest choices in life? So I'm leaving this kind of like a conundrum, because I know that I'm one of those that, sometimes I have to ask myself, what's my point? And maybe I don't have a point here, but then maybe it's just something to ponder upon as to when we forgive, when we cast judgment, take a moment to ask, are we really clear in what we're doing? And is it good for us? Is it safe for the world? And is our decision okay? And if we can say that, I think we give ourselves permission to be who we are in the journey that we each follow. So in the words of my mother, God bless us all. Have a great day, everyone. And thank you so much for giving me your time. We'll see you next time.